I'm Rachel Warren, 32, and last Tuesday I stood in a courtroom watching my own parents try to take away the house I purchased with my hard-earned savings. That house should have been Christopher's, my mother hissed, glaring at me with eyes I no longer recognized. My father's attorney presented a folder containing papers I'd never seen before. Apparently, my parents had drafted documents claiming my brother had the family right to purchase any property in our hometown first. Blood meant nothing anymore. This was war. If you've ever felt betrayed by your own family, you know that hollow feeling in your chest that never quite goes away. Before I dive into how I ended up facing my parents in court over a house I legally purchased, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Family drama like mine happens everywhere, so drop your location in the comments below. If my story of standing up against family favoritism resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family justice. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in Mapleton was like living inside a Norman Rockwell painting. Our town of just under 20,000 people boasted tree-lined streets, a charming main square, and a historic district where all the important families lived in beautifully preserved homes dating back to the 1800s. From childhood, I'd walk through that district, admiring the Victorian houses with their intricate woodwork and colorful facades. I'd imagine what it would be like to call one of those grand homes my own someday. My brother Christopher was 4 years older, and from my earliest memories, it was clear he held a special place in our family hierarchy. Christopher was the golden child, the Warren family prince who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Margaret and Robert Warren, mom and dad, made no effort to hide their preference. When Christopher turned 10, our parents transformed our backyard into a carnival complete with rented games, a cotton candy machine, and a magician. 40 kids from school attended, and my parents talked about it for months afterward. 2 months later, my 6th birthday consisted of a store-bought cake and a small gathering of relatives who spent most of the time asking Christopher about his latest achievements in school. "Rachel, be a good girl and let your brother open your presents for you," my mother would say, as if allowing Christopher to tear into my birthday gifts was some kind of privilege. I'd sit there watching him rip through the wrapping paper of boxes with my name on them, forcing a smile because I knew a frown would result in being called ungrateful or jealous. The pattern continued throughout our childhood. When Christopher needed a graphing calculator for math class, my parents purchased the most expensive model available. When I needed the same calculator 2 years later, I was told to use Christopher's old one because it still works just fine. When he got his driver's license, my parents bought him a nearly new Jeep. When my turn came, I was given access to my mother's old station wagon, but only on weekends and after completing a list of chores. The college fund disparity was perhaps the most glaring example. Christopher attended Princeton with our parents covering his tuition, apartment, and even giving him a generous monthly allowance. When it came time for me to go to college, I was told the family education fund had been mostly depleted and that I should consider the state university and apply for scholarships. I worked part-time throughout college, graduated with honors despite the hours spent white dressing, and still left with student loan debt that would take me years to pay off. Meanwhile, Christopher graduated with a finance degree and immediately moved to New York, where he secured a position at an investment firm with a glowing recommendation letter from our father's golf buddy. After college, I started my career as a junior accountant at a local firm in a city about 2 hours from Mapleton. My first apartment was a cramped one-bedroom with a persistent mold problem and neighbors who fought loudly at all hours. Still, it was mine, paid for with my own money, and that meant something to me. For the next 8 years, I worked 60-hour weeks, volunteered for every difficult project, and slowly built my reputation in the accounting world. While Christopher changed jobs 3 times in New York, always moving to positions with more impressive titles but questionable longevity, I remained steady, building expertise and client relationships. When I earned my CPA license, I called my parents to share the news. My father's response: "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Christopher is being considered for vice president position?" It didn't matter that the vice president title at Christopher's firm was given to dozens of people, or that he'd only been there for 8 months. In my parents' eyes, his achievements always eclipsed mine. Despite this lifelong pattern, when I received a significant promotion to senior accountant at Brenner and Associates, one of the most prestigious firms in the region, I decided to move back to Mapleton. My parents were getting older, and despite our complicated relationship, I felt a responsibility to be nearby. I also missed the charm of my hometown and thought perhaps as adults, the family dynamic might improve. I found a modest rental near the downtown area and settled in, visiting my parents for Sunday dinners when my schedule allowed. Christopher rarely visited from New York, making it home perhaps twice a year for major holidays, yet my parents spoke of him constantly as if he had just left the room. The Christmas gathering that year was the first major red flag that things hadn't changed and might actually be worse than I realized. As we sat around the living room opening gifts, my father cleared his throat for an announcement. "Your mother and I have been thinking about the future," he began, looking directly at Christopher, who was scrolling through his phone. "We've set aside a significant amount to help Christopher purchase a home here in Mapleton when he decides to return to his roots." My mother beamed. "We've been watching the market in the historic district. Several of those beautiful old homes might be coming available in the next few years. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a Warren living in one of those grand houses? Continuing the family legacy." I sat quietly, the half-unwrapped sweater in my lap forgotten. Neither of them looked at me or mentioned that I was already living in Mapleton, already building my career here, already visiting them regularly. "That's incredibly generous," Christopher said, finally looking up from his phone. "I've been thinking lately that New York isn't forever. Might be nice to come back eventually, especially with property values here on the rise." I noticed he didn't say anything about missing family or loving our hometown, just that the investment opportunity might be good. Still, my parents looked at him with such pride you would have thought he'd just announced a cure for cancer. Later that night, as I drove back to my rental, I made a decision. I wouldn't let their favoritism define me anymore. I would build my own life, make my own choices, and maybe someday own my own home in Mapleton, not because my parents helped me, but in spite of them never offering to do so. Little did I know that this determination would lead to the biggest family battle of my life, one that would eventually find us all in a courtroom with our neighbors watching. 6 months after that Christmas announcement, I was driving down Oak Street in the historic district after meeting a client when I saw it. A "for sale" sign had appeared in front of the Davis house, a stunning Victorian with a wraparound porch, original stained glass windows, and the kind of architectural details that simply don't exist in modern homes. The Davis family had owned the house for generations. Mrs. Eleanor Davis, now in her 80s, had been a fixture in the community, known for her garden club leadership and the Christmas cookies she distributed to neighbors every December. I'd admired her home since childhood, often slowing my bike as I passed to imagine what it would be like inside those walls. I pulled over immediately and jotted down the realtor's number. That evening, I called and scheduled a showing for the next day with Jessica Miller, the listing agent. "It's a special property," Jessica explained as she led me through the front door. "Mrs. Davis has moved to assisted living closer to her daughter in Arizona, but she's very particular about who buys her family home. She wants someone who will appreciate its history and character." The interior exceeded my expectations. 12-foot ceilings with ornate moldings. Original hardwood floors that gleamed with a century of careful polishing. A library with built-in bookshelves that reached from floor to ceiling. 5 bedrooms, each with unique architectural features. A kitchen that had been tastefully updated while preserving vintage elements. In the sunroom that overlooked a garden bursting with spring flowers, I felt something click into place. This was meant to be my home. I could see myself having morning coffee in this very spot, working in the library on rainy days, hosting friends for dinner parties in the formal dining room. "The interest has been significant," Jessica warned. "I have 3 more showings today alone. If you're serious, you'll want to move quickly." That night, I pulled out all my financial records and made calculations until nearly 3 in the morning. The house was at the very top of what I could afford, and even then, it would require using every penny of my savings for the down payment and making some significant budget adjustments going forward. But my recent promotion had come with a substantial raise, and my investment portfolio was performing well. I called my bank the next morning and began the pre-approval process for a mortgage. The loan officer raised her eyebrows when I mentioned the address. The Davis house? That's a prestigious property. You're certain about the price range? I've done the calculations, I assured her. It will be tight but manageable. As I waited for the paperwork to process, I decided to call my parents. Despite everything, some part of me hoped they might be happy for me, might finally see that I was successful in my own right. "Mom, you won't believe what I'm doing," I said when she answered. "I'm applying for a mortgage. The Davis house on Oak Street is for sale, and I'm going to make an offer." The silence on the other end lasted so long, I thought we might have been disconnected. "The Davis house," she finally repeated. "On Oak Street. In the historic district." "Yes, it's beautiful. I just had a showing yesterday, and have you told Christopher about this?" The question caught me off guard. Why would I tell Christopher? He lives in New York. But he's been talking about moving back, and you know how much he loves the historic homes. Don't you think he should know this particular house is available? I felt a familiar sinking feeling. "Mom, I'm not calling to help Christopher find a house. I'm calling because I'm buying a house."
Me.
"Your daughter, who already lives here in Mapleton." "Well, of course, and that's nice, dear. But this specific house? In the historic district? That seems like quite a reach for your situation." My situation being that I wasn't Christopher. I ended the call shortly after, promising to keep them updated but feeling that familiar sting of dismissal. 3 days later, my offer was accepted. I'd gone in at asking price with minimal contingencies, making myself as attractive a buyer as possible. Jessica called with the good news, sounding genuinely pleased. "Mrs. Davis actually selected your offer over one that was slightly higher," she confided. "She liked that you're a local professional planning to live in the house, not an investor looking to flip it or turn it into rental units." The joy I felt signing those initial papers was overwhelming. For the first time in my life, I had achieved something significant that my parents couldn't minimize or redirect to be about Christopher. This was my house, my achievement, my future. The morning after my offer was accepted, my phone rang with Christopher's name on the screen. We spoke perhaps 3 or 4 times a year, usually around holidays, so a random Tuesday morning call was unexpected. "Rachel," he said, skipping any greeting. "Is it true you're buying the Davis house on Oak Street?" I hadn't told him, which meant my parents had. "Yes, my offer was accepted yesterday." "That's interesting timing." His voice had that same tone my mother's had taken, slightly accusatory, as if I'd done something underhanded. "Why is it interesting timing?" "I've been telling Mom and Dad I'm considering moving back to Mapleton. They mentioned several properties in the historic district that might be coming available, including, specifically, the Davis house." The pieces clicked together. My parents' strange reaction, their immediate question about whether Christopher knew. They had been planning to help him buy this very house. "Well, it's not coming available anymore," I said firmly. "I've signed the papers, and I'm moving forward with the purchase. Don't you think you should have checked with family first? Some of these old homes have been in Mapleton families for generations. There's a certain protocol." "Protocol?" "Christopher, it was listed on the open market. I saw it, I wanted it, I qualified for it, and my offer was accepted. That's the protocol." The conversation deteriorated from there, with Christopher suggesting I was being selfish and not considering the family plan. A plan no one had bothered to mention included specific properties I wasn't supposed to pursue. By the time we hung up, I felt shaken but even more determined. This reaction only confirmed that I had spent my entire life being treated as secondary, expected to step aside whenever Christopher expressed interest in something. Not this time. This house would be mine. The closing process moved forward over the next month. I signed countless documents, handed over my life savings for the down payment, and finally, on a bright Friday afternoon, received the keys to my new home. Standing on the porch, my porch, I felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything I'd experienced before. I decided to host a small housewarming party the following weekend, inviting colleagues from work, a few friends from around town, and yes, my family. Despite the strange reactions, I hoped that seeing the house and my happiness might help them share in my achievement. I had no idea I was actually inviting them to the first battle in what would become an all-out family war. The day of my housewarming party arrived with perfect early summer weather. I had spent the week moving in essentials and making the place presentable, though many rooms remained sparsely furnished. My plan was to fill the house gradually with quality pieces that complemented its character, rather than rushing to furnish it all at once. I had prepared a selection of appetizers, chilled several bottles of wine, and even splurged on fresh flowers for the main rooms. The party was scheduled to begin at 3 o'clock, but at 2:15, the doorbell rang. Through the stained glass panels flanking my front door, I could make out my parents' silhouettes. "We thought we'd come early to help you set up," my mother said as I opened the door, though she carried nothing and immediately began looking around critically. My father followed behind her, his expression unreadable. "The place is bigger than I remembered," my mother commented as I led them through to the kitchen. "So much space for just one person. Seems excessive, really." "I have 5 bedrooms," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Plenty of room for guests, and I'm using one as a home office." "Still," she persisted, running a finger along the marble countertop I'd been so excited about, "it's an awful lot of house to maintain. The heating costs alone in winter will be substantial." My father had wandered into the library, examining the built-in shelves with a frown. "These need refinishing," he called out. "And I noticed the 3rd step on the stairs has a creak. Foundation might be settling." I took a deep breath. I had a thorough inspection before purchasing. The house is in excellent condition for its age. Any issues are minor and cosmetic. "If you say so," my father replied dubiously. "Just seems like a lot of potential problems for someone without, handyman skills or renovation experience." The implication was clear. Unlike Christopher, who had spent exactly one summer during high school helping our uncle with basic construction projects, I wasn't qualified to own a historic home. By the time other guests began arriving at 3, my parents had identified a dozen serious concerns about my purchase, from the age of the water heater to the possibility of outdated wiring. I was relieved when my best friend Diane arrived, providing a buffer from their comments. "This place is absolutely stunning," Diane gushed, her genuine enthusiasm a balm after my parents' criticisms. "Rachel, it's perfect for you. I can already see how you're going to make it shine." More guests arrived, colleagues from Brenner and Associates, neighbors introducing themselves, a few friends from my college days who lived nearby. The atmosphere lightened as people explored the house, offering compliments and congratulations. I began to relax, thinking perhaps the worst was over. Then Christopher arrived, unexpectedly and uninvited, with a woman I'd never met before. "Rachel," he called out with forced joviality, air kissing near my cheek. Couldn't miss my little sister's big day. "This is Samantha, my girlfriend." Samantha offered a limp handshake and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Christopher has told me so much about his hometown. And this house, it's exactly how he described it." Something in her phrasing caught my attention. How would Christopher have described this specific house in detail to her? My parents immediately gravitated to Christopher and Samantha, their entire demeanor transforming. My mother, who had been tight-lipped and critical all afternoon, was suddenly beaming and animated. My father clapped Christopher on the back and immediately offered to give them the real tour, as if I hadn't just shown them the entire house. I busied myself with hosting duties, trying to ignore the way my parents paraded Christopher through my home like he was the returning prince touring his kingdom. When it came time for a toast, I clinked my glass and thanked everyone for coming to celebrate this milestone with me. Before I could continue, Christopher raised his own glass. "To new beginnings," he said, smiling in a way that immediately put me on alert. "And to unexpected opportunities." Though I have to say, when Mom and Dad told me the Davis house was coming on the market, I had some plans of my own for this beautiful property. The room quieted. My colleagues looked uncomfortable. Diane moved closer to me, a protective gesture I appreciated. "What kind of plans?" someone asked. Christopher shrugged, the picture of casual confidence. Well, Samantha and I have been talking about leaving New York, coming back to establish roots where I grew up. This house, with its history and location, would have been perfect for the family we're planning to start. A Warren back in the historic district, raising the next generation in Mapleton. My mother actually clasped her hands together at this speech, looking teary-eyed. It would have been so perfect, she added, seemingly oblivious to the fact that she was standing in my house, at my housewarming party. Probably for the best, though, my father interjected. A house like this is a major undertaking. Needs the right resources and connections to maintain properly. Christopher, remember the Hendersons? Their son just joined that architectural preservation firm in the city. Might be good to have him take a look at some of these original features, make sure they're being properly preserved. The implication was clear. I didn't have the resources and connections to properly care for the house. And apparently, they were already planning for Christopher to have access to my home for preservation purposes. I appreciate the concern, I said firmly, but I've already consulted with a historical preservation specialist who's provided guidance on maintaining the original features. My mother waved this away. Yes, but family connections are different. The Hendersons have known your father for 30 years. Actually, Christopher added, Mom and Dad had mentioned this place might be coming available, and we had discussed the possibility of me having first option on it. Sort of a family understanding that historic properties should stay within established Mapleton families whenever possible. I stared at him, then at my parents, who were nodding as if this made perfect sense. This is the first I'm hearing of any family understanding. And I am family. I'm a Warren too, remember? Of course you are, honey, my mother said in the same tone she'd used to placate a child. But Christopher is planning to marry, start a family. A house like this should have children running through it, carrying on traditions. You're single, focused on your career. It's just different. The room had grown uncomfortably quiet. My colleagues were finding sudden interest in their wine glasses or the architectural details of the ceiling. Diane's hand found mine and squeezed. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You think Christopher had some sort of right of first refusal on this house because he might someday have children? While I, as a single woman, should what? Wait for your permission before buying property in my own hometown. Now, Rachel, my father began in his lecture voice, nobody's saying you can't buy property. But there are certain understandings about the historic district. Families like ours have traditions, expectations. Christopher expressed interest in returning, and we had discussed helping him establish himself here in a suitable home. When? I demanded. When exactly did Christopher express this burning desire to return to Mapleton? Because he's visited twice in the past 3 years, and both times he spent the entire visit checking his phone and talking about how much better everything is in New York. Christopher's face darkened. That's unfair. I've always planned to return eventually. I've been building my career, making connections that will benefit me, benefit all of us, when I do come back. All of us. I laughed incredulously. How exactly does your career in New York benefit me or Mapleton? Rachel, that's enough, my mother snapped. The point is, there was an understanding. The historic homes in Mapleton should go to those who can best represent the town's heritage. A Christopher is the Warren who will carry on the family name, continue the lineage. And there it was. The real issue laid bare. No matter what I achieved, I would always be secondary because I wouldn't continue the Warren name. My accomplishments, my hard work, my love for my hometown, none of it mattered compared to Christopher's theoretical future children who would bear the sacred Warren surname. I think, I said slowly, that you all should leave now. Rachel, my father started, but I cut him off. No. This is my house. I bought it legally with my own money, earned through my own hard work. I didn't ask for your help, and clearly, I wouldn't have received it even if I had. But I don't need it. What I need is for you to leave my home. You're making a scene, my mother hissed. No, you made a scene when you came to my housewarming party and suggested I had no right to buy this house because I'm single and female. Christopher stepped forward, his expression now conciliatory. Look, we're all getting emotional. Maybe we should discuss this privately as a family. There might be a compromise. There's nothing to compromise on, I interrupted. The house is mine. The deed has my name on it. End of discussion. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This isn't over, Rachel. There are family agreements you're not considering. Verbal commitments that have legal standing. Dad, please, I said, suddenly exhausted. Just go. To my surprise, it was Samantha who took charge, placing a hand on Christopher's arm. We should respect Rachel's wishes. It's her party, her home. We can discuss family matters another time. My parents looked ready to argue further, but Christopher, after a moment's hesitation, nodded.
Fine.
We'll go. But this conversation isn't over. They left amid uncomfortable glances from my other guests, many of whom made excuses, to depart shortly afterward. Within an hour, only Diane remained, helping me clear away glasses and plates in a kitchen that suddenly felt too large and empty. Well, that was something, she said, trying to lighten the mood. Your family really knows how to christen a new home. I laughed despite myself, but it quickly turned into a sob that caught me by surprise. Diane immediately put down the plate she was holding and wrapped me in a hug. Hey, it's okay. They were completely out of line and everyone saw it. I just don't understand. I managed between breaths. It's always been like this, but never so explicit. So public. Diane guided me to a chair at the kitchen island. Listen, there's something you should know. When I was helping get more wine from the pantry, I overheard your parents and Christopher talking. They didn't know I was there. I wiped my eyes. What did they say? Your father was telling Christopher not to worry, that they had documentation that would resolve the situation. Christopher asked if it would hold up, and your father said something about family agreements being binding in certain circumstances. Rachel, I think they might be planning something legal against you. I stared at her, disbelief giving way to a cold anger. They wouldn't. They couldn't possibly. But even as I said it, I knew they would. The look in my father's eyes as they left wasn't just anger. It was determination. This wasn't over, just as he'd warned. Whatever they're planning, I said finally, they won't win. This is my house. I earned it. And I'm not giving it up. Not to Christopher. Not to anyone. What I didn't know then was just how far my family would go to take my home away from me, or how much of our private family dysfunction would soon become very public knowledge in the town of Mapleton. 3 days after the disastrous housewarming party, I received a certified letter. The return address was for Grayson Legal Associates, a firm I wasn't familiar with. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, somehow knowing before I even unfolded the document what it would contain. Dear Ms. Warren, it began formally. This office represents Margaret and Robert Warren in the matter of property ownership rights regarding the residence at 427 Oak Street, currently occupied by you. Our clients assert that there exists a prior verbal and implied agreement giving Christopher Warren right of first refusal on any historic district property acquisition by Warren family members. I sank onto my porch steps, the beautiful porch that had so attracted me to this house, now feeling like contested territory. The letter continued, outlining vague claims about family tradition, verbal contracts witnessed by community members, and implied covenant of family property rights. The conclusion was clear. I was being asked, no, legally instructed, to cease claiming sole ownership of my home and enter into negotiations to transfer the property to Christopher at my purchase price or face further legal action. My first instinct was to call my parents directly and demand an explanation, but something stopped me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. They had taken an intentional legal step against me. Responding emotionally would only play into their hands. Instead, I called Diane, who recommended her divorce attorney, Laura Blackwell. She's a piranha in the courtroom, Diane assured me. If anyone can shut this down fast, it's Laura. Laura was able to see me the next day. Her office was in a converted Victorian not unlike my new home, though adapted for professional use. She listened without interruption as I explained the situation, reviewing the letter with narrowed eyes. This is... She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Unusual. Family disputes over property happen frequently, but typically involve inheritance or divorce. A claim of right of first refusal without any written documentation is thin at best. So, they don't have a case. I felt a surge of relief. I didn't say that, Laura cautioned. Family law can be complicated, and judges sometimes give weight to verbal agreements, especially if they can produce witnesses claiming knowledge of such arrangements. But there was no agreement, I insisted. This is something they've invented after the fact because they're upset I bought a house they wanted for Christopher. Laura nodded. I believe you, and that will be our position. But we need to take this seriously and respond appropriately. She tapped the letter. They're claiming a family agreement exists. We need to see this alleged documentation. She drafted a response requesting any and all documentation related to this supposed agreement, making it clear that without substantial evidence, we considered the claim baseless harassment. 3 days later, we received a document titled Warren Family Property Understanding, dated 2 years earlier and signed by my parents and Christopher. This is absurd, I said, staring at the papers Laura had forwarded to me. They created this after I bought the house. I was never informed of any family understanding, never asked to sign anything, never even told such a concept existed. Laura studied the document carefully. There are some inconsistencies here. The paper quality, the printer signatures. I'm going to have our forensic document specialist take a look. If this was created recently but backdated, we can prove that. Meanwhile, word of the dispute had begun spreading through Mapleton. I noticed whispers when I entered the local coffee shop, conversations that halted when I approached the grocery store. One morning, I overheard a snippet as I waited for my morning latte. Taking advantage of her own parents, after all they've done for her brother? I froze, my back to the speakers, as they continued. Robert told James at golf that she knew Christopher had his heart set on a historic home. Did it deliberately to spite him, because she's always been jealous. The story being spread bore no resemblance to reality, but I recognized my father's handiwork. He was a master at shaping narratives to cast himself and Christopher in the most favorable light. The stress began affecting my work. I found myself making small errors on client accounts, losing focus during meetings. After I missed an important filing deadline, my boss Patricia called me into her office. "Rachel, this isn't like you," she said, her concern evident. "Is everything all right?" Something about her genuine worry broke through my attempts to compartmentalize. To my horror, I burst into tears, something I'd never done in a professional setting. Between sobs, I explained the situation with my family and the house. Instead of the awkward professional distance I expected, Patricia came around her desk and sat beside me. "That's absolutely outrageous," she said when I finished. "Your own parents taking you to court over a house you legally purchased?" I nodded miserably, embarrassed by my breakdown but relieved to have shared the burden. "My husband is Judge William Patterson," Patricia said thoughtfully. "He doesn't handle civil cases anymore, but he knows everyone in the county court system.
Let me talk to him about this."
Not to influence anything," she added quickly, "but to make sure you get a fair hearing if this actually goes to court." Her support was a turning point. I realized I'd been so accustomed to being the less favored child that I'd internalized a sense that maybe my parents were right. Maybe I didn't deserve this house as much as Christopher did. Patricia's indignation helped me see the situation more clearly. Laura's investigation yielded exactly what we suspected. The family agreement document had been created recently, printed on paper that hadn't even been manufactured until 3 months ago, and digitally signed with a software version that had only been released last year. "This is fraud," Laura said bluntly during our next meeting. "They've created a backdated document to support their claim. We have the evidence. We could potentially file countercharges for this." Part of me wanted to do exactly that. To show my parents that their manipulations had consequences. But another part hesitated. "They're still my parents," I said finally. "I don't want to destroy my family. I just want them to respect my right to live my own life." Laura nodded understanding. Let's focus on defeating their claim first. If they persist after being shown the evidence of fraud, we can reconsider countercharges. She attempted mediation, inviting my parents and their attorney to a meeting where she presented our evidence about the fraudulent document. I had hoped this would be the end of it, that faced with proof of their deception, they would drop the case. Instead, they shifted tactics. Now they claimed the document was merely a formalization of a long-standing verbal agreement that had existed within the Warren family for generations. Their attorney, Thomas Grayson, produced affidavits from 3 of my parents' friends, all claiming they had witnessed discussions about Christopher having first rights to historic district properties. My phone began filling with texts from Christopher, alternating between guilt-tripping and thinly veiled threats. "This could all go away if you'd just be reasonable," one message read. "Family should come first. Don't you care about your future nieces and nephews having a proper family home?" Another was more direct. "Dad's prepared to take this all the way. You know he never loses. Just sell me the house, and we can all move on before your reputation in town is completely destroyed." I showed the messages to Laura, who advised me to stop responding entirely. "They're trying to pressure you outside the legal process," she explained. "Every message you send could potentially be used against you." As the court date approached, I found an unexpected source of strength. Going through old boxes I'd brought to the new house, I discovered journals I'd kept throughout childhood and adolescence. Rereading them was like opening a window into a painful past I'd tried to forget. Entry after entry detailed slights, dismissals, and blatant favoritism. The Christmas when my parents gave Christopher a computer and me a sweater. The time I made honor roll and my father responded, "If you'd taken the advanced courses like your brother, that might be impressive." The college visits where my mother constantly commented on how proud they were that Christopher had been accepted there years earlier. These journals transformed my pain into resolve. This pattern had continued my entire life, and it would never stop unless I took a stand. This house, this legal battle, was my line in the sand. The morning I received notice that Warren versus Warren had been scheduled for court, I took a personal day from work. Walking through each room of my contested home, I recommitted to fighting for what was rightfully mine. I'd never imagined having to face my family in court. But as Diane reminded me when I called her in tears, they made this choice, not you. They decided a house, a material object, was worth destroying their relationship with their daughter. That's on them, not you. As I stood in the library, running my fingers along the bookshelves I'd started filling with my collection, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Whatever happened in that courtroom, I would know I stood up for myself, perhaps for the first time in my life. If you've been going through family drama like mine, remember that sometimes standing up for yourself is the hardest but most necessary thing you can do. It took me 32 years to truly stand my ground. I've received so many messages from people facing similar family betrayals, and I want you to know you're not alone. If my story has helped you feel less isolated in your struggle, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything as I continue sharing the most difficult chapter of my life. Now, let me tell you what happened when my family and I finally faced off in court. The Mapleton County Courthouse stands in the center of town, a stately brick building with white columns that has witnessed generations of local disputes. On the morning of the hearing, I arrived early, dressed in my most professional navy suit, hair neatly styled, the image of competence and stability. Laura met me on the steps, her briefcase bulging with documents. "Ready?" she asked, her expression conveying both concern and confidence. I nodded, though my stomach churned with anxiety. This wasn't just about a house anymore, it was about my place in my family, in my hometown, and in my own life story. The courtroom was more crowded than I'd expected. Civil disputes like this don't typically draw spectators, but as I walked down the center aisle, I realized many of Mapleton's residents had come to witness the Warren family drama firsthand. My parents were already seated at the plaintiff's table with their attorney, Thomas Grayson, a silver-haired man with an expensive suit and an air of practiced sincerity. What truly stung was seeing the rows behind them filled with extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins I'd grown up with. all apparently there to support my parents' claim against me. Only my mother's sister, Aunt Susan, was conspicuously absent from the family block. On my side sat Diane, Patricia from work, and a handful of colleagues who had taken time off to support me. The imbalance was striking and painful, but I straightened my spine and kept my expression neutral as I took my seat beside Laura. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Miranda Fleming," the bailiff announced, and we stood as a woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor entered and took her place at the bench. "Warren versus Warren," she read from her docket, looking up to survey the room. "Family property dispute. Unusual to see this outside of probate or divorce court." Her gaze moved between my parents and me. "Let's keep this civil and focused on facts, not emotions. Mr. Grayson, as you represent the plaintiffs, please present your opening statement." Thomas Grayson rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. "Your Honor, this case centers on a long-standing family tradition within the Warren family regarding property acquisition in Mapleton's historic district. For generations, the Warrens have maintained that family members with the intention of continuing the family lineage have priority when historic properties become available." I clenched my jaw at the implication that as a single woman, I had no right to family priority because I wasn't currently producing heirs with the Warren name. Robert and Margaret Warren have evidence of this understanding, which their son Christopher has honored and their daughter Rachel has willfully disregarded. They seek only to maintain family tradition and ensure that properties of historical significance remain within the primary family line. Judge Fleming's expression revealed nothing as she nodded. "Ms. Blackwell, your opening statement?" Laura stood, her posture radiating controlled confidence. "Your Honor, this case is simple. Rachel Warren purchased a home legally on the open market. She obtained financing based on her own excellent credit and professional success. She closed on the property without contingencies or complications. Every step of this transaction was proper and documented." She paused, allowing this foundation to settle before continuing. "The plaintiffs have produced a supposed family agreement that my client was never informed of, never agreed to, and which we can prove was fabricated after Rachel's purchase specifically to support this baseless claim. This case represents an unfortunate instance of family favoritism escalating to legal harassment, nothing more." The judge nodded again. "Mr. Grayson, call your first witness." My father took the stand first, sworn in with his hand on the Bible. A touch I found ironic given the lies he was about to tell. He painted a picture of Warren family history intertwined with Mapleton's development, emphasizing Christopher's commitment to carrying on traditions and my supposed lifelong rebellion against family values. "We always made it clear," he stated with practiced sincerity, "that historic properties in Mapleton should remain within the primary family line." Rachel knew this. She knew her brother had expressed interest in returning to Mapleton and purchasing exactly this type of home. She deliberately acted against family interests. During cross-examination, Laura was surgical. "Mr. Warren, can you provide any written documentation of this family understanding that predates Rachel's purchase of the Davis home?" My father shifted uncomfortably. It was primarily a verbal tradition. A verbal tradition that Rachel was explicitly informed of? "Can you recall the date and circumstances of when you specifically explained this tradition to her?" "Well, it was understood. Family gatherings, holiday discussions." "So, no specific conversation you can point to where Rachel was informed of and agreed to this alleged tradition?" "It was implied consent through participation in family activities." Laura raised an eyebrow. "Implied consent through participation in family activities. I see. And this document your attorney provided, dated 2 years ago, you stand by the authenticity of this document?" My father's gaze flickered to his attorney. "Yes, of course." Laura walked to our table and retrieved a folder. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter evidence showing this document was created using software not available at the purported date of signing, on paper stock that wasn't manufactured until this year." A murmur ran through the courtroom as she presented the forensic evidence. My father's face flushed, but He maintained that regardless of potential clerical errors in recreation, the agreement had existed in spirit for years. My mother testified next, emotional and indignant, claiming I had always been difficult and resistant to family unity. She described Christopher's supposed deep attachment to Mapleton despite his lengthy absence, and her distress at seeing a family tradition deliberately flouted. Christopher's testimony was perhaps the most revealing. Under direct examination by Grayson, he spoke passionately about his intention to return to Mapleton someday and raise a family in the historic district. But when Laura cross-examined him, the facade began to crack. "Mr. Warren, how many times have you visited Mapleton in the past 3 years?" Laura asked. Christopher shifted in his seat. "I've been building my career in New York. It's difficult to get away." "That wasn't my question. Please answer. How many times?" "Perhaps 4 or 5 times. Records indicate it was twice. Both for holidays, both for less than 72 hours. Is that correct?" He conceded reluctantly. "And during these brief visits, did you explore the historic district? Meet with realtors? Research property values or restoration costs?" "Not formally, but so despite claiming a deep desire to purchase a home in the historic district, you took no concrete steps toward that goal. Is that accurate?" Christopher's composed demeanor slipped. "I was waiting for the right property." "The right property? Like the Davis house? Did you make an offer on it when it came on the market?" "No, but did you contact the listing agent? Schedule a viewing? Apply for mortgage pre-approval?" "My parents were handling those preliminary steps while you remained in New York." "Mr. Warren, do you currently have plans to leave your position in New York and return to Mapleton?" Christopher glanced at our parents before answering. "Not immediately, no. In fact," Laura continued, consulting her notes, "you recently accepted a promotion that comes with a 2-year commitment to remain with your New York firm, correct?" The courtroom stirred as Christopher reluctantly confirmed this. "So your claim to urgently need this specific property is based on a potential return to Mapleton at some undefined future date, potentially years from now?" When it was my turn to testify, I felt strangely calm. I described my education, my career development, my decision to return to Mapleton while Christopher remained in New York. I explained the proper steps I'd taken to purchase the house and my shock at my family's reaction. At no point in my life, I stated clearly, was I ever informed of any family understanding regarding property purchases. This claim was invented after I bought my home because my parents have always prioritized my brother's hypothetical future over my actual present. During a brief recess, Laura informed me that she had a surprise witness. "Someone came forward after hearing about the case," she explained. "I think you'll want to hear what she has to say." When court resumed, Laura called Eleanor Davis to the stand. A murmur ran through the courtroom as an elegant woman in her 80s made her way forward with the help of a cane. Mrs. Davis had returned from Arizona specifically for this hearing. After being sworn in, Mrs. Davis adjusted her glasses and surveyed the courtroom with clear, intelligent eyes. "Mrs. Davis," Laura began, "you are the previous owner of the property in question, correct?" "Yes, dear. My late husband and I purchased it in 1962. I lived there until last year when my health made it necessary to move closer to my daughter." "And when you decided to sell, what were your priorities regarding the new owner?" Mrs. Davis straightened in her seat. "I wanted someone who would love the house, live in it, maintain its character. Not an investor or someone looking to flip it. That home held 60 years of my memories. It mattered who came next." "Were you aware of any interest in the property from the Warren family before listing it?" "Oh my, yes." Mrs. Davis nodded emphatically. "Robert and Margaret approached me several times in the months before I decided to sell. They were quite persistent, saying they wanted to purchase it for their son who was in New York." I glanced at my parents, who looked uncomfortable. "And did you consider their offer?" Laura asked. "I did not," Mrs. Davis replied firmly. "They made it clear their son wasn't planning to move back immediately. They mentioned using it as a family property in the interim, possibly renting it out until he decided to return. That wasn't what I wanted for my home." So, you declined to sell to them before listing publicly? Correct. And when dear Rachel made her offer, my agent told me she was a local professional who intended to live in the house herself. That aligned perfectly with my wishes. Mrs. Davis turned slightly to address the judge directly. Your Honor, I chose Rachel as the buyer. Not her parents, not her brother. I had the right to sell to whomever I wanted, and I chose someone who valued the home for what it was, not as an investment opportunity. During the redirect, Grayson tried to suggest Mrs. Davis might have been confused about the Warrens' intentions, but she cut him off with surprising sharpness. Young man, I may be 84, but my hearing and memory are just fine. Robert Warren specifically said, and I quote, "The historic district properties are appreciating faster than any other investment." That told me everything I needed to know about their intentions for my home. As the testimony continued, a clearer picture emerged. Through various witnesses, including the real estate agent Jessica Miller, we established that my parents had attempted to purchase not just the Davis house but 3 other historic properties in the past year, all supposedly for Christopher's eventual return. Court documents Laura had subpoenaed revealed that my parents had created an LLC called Warren Heritage Holdings specifically for acquiring and managing these properties. The business plan found in these documents explicitly mentioned leveraging historic district property values and potential rental income during the holding period. By the time all testimony concluded, even my extended family members seated behind my parents looked troubled by what had been revealed. This wasn't about family tradition or preserving heritage. It was about real estate investment using Christopher as the sympathetic front. The judge called for a 30-minute recess before final arguments. In the bathroom, I locked myself in a stall and finally allowed the tears that had been threatening all day. The public exposure of my family's dysfunction was both vindicating and deeply painful. When I emerged to wash my face, I found my mother's sister, Aunt Susan, waiting for me. "Rachel," she said softly, "I need to tell you something before the proceedings finish." Aunt Susan had always been something of an outlier in our family. My mother's younger sister by 5 years, she had pursued a career in journalism rather than making the proper marriage my grandparents had envisioned for her. Growing up, I'd always sensed a tension between her and my parents, though as a child, I never understood why. "I should have spoken up years ago," she said, her voice low as we stood in the courthouse bathroom. "I watched how they treated you compared to Christopher, and I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. That was wrong of me." I dabbed at my eyes with a paper towel, trying to compose myself. "It's not your responsibility to fix my relationship with my parents." "Perhaps not, but I have information you should know." She glanced at the bathroom door, ensuring our privacy. "Your mother has always resented independence in women. It stems from how our parents raised us. She was the perfect daughter who followed all the rules, while I questioned everything and eventually left Mapleton to pursue my own path." This aligned with what I'd observed my entire life. My mother's discomfort with my self-sufficiency, her preference for Christopher's constant seeking of approval and assistance. When you chose accounting instead of teaching like she wanted, when you moved away for college and built your own life, each step made her more resentful. You reminded her too much of me and of the path not taken. I processed this, pieces of my childhood suddenly shifting into new perspective. "But there's more," Aunt Susan continued. "I found these in my research." She pulled several folded papers from her purse. "Your parents remortgaged their home 3 times in the past decade. Each time coincided with one of Christopher's business ventures failing." I scanned the documents. Public records of home equity loans against my parents' paid-off house, totaling nearly $300,000. Christopher's condo in New York? Your parents provided the down payment. His investment firm that collapsed after 18 months? They covered his losses. That luxury car he drives? A gift when he claimed his bonus didn't come through. The bathroom door opened, and another woman entered. Aunt Susan lowered her voice further. "They're nearly bankrupt, Rachel. This house you purchased, I believe they intended it as an investment property to recover their financial losses. Christopher's return to Mapleton was never the real plan. They needed equity, rental income, and the property appreciation to rescue their retirement. The revelation left me breathless. All this talk of family tradition and rightful inheritance was a cover for financial desperation. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked when the other woman had gone into a stall. Aunt Susan's eyes were sad but determined. "Because you deserve to know the truth. And because I can't stand by watching them destroy their relationship with you over money and pride." She squeezed my hand. "I'll testify if needed." By the time I returned to the courtroom, I felt both stronger and heavier with this new knowledge. Laura noticed the change immediately. "Everything okay?" she whispered as I took my seat. "I have new information," I murmured back, sliding Aunt Susan's documents toward her. "My aunt just gave me these." Laura scanned them quickly, her eyebrows rising. "This explains a lot," she said. "May I use these?" I nodded as the judge returned and called the court back to order. Final arguments were scheduled to begin, but before Grayson could rise, the bailiff approached the judge with a note. After reading it, Judge Fleming addressed the court. "I've been informed that Susan Miller, sister to plaintiff Margaret Warren, wishes to provide relevant testimony. Given the family nature of this dispute, I'll allow this late addition. Ms. Miller, please come forward." My mother's face drained of color as Aunt Susan walked confidently to the witness stand. Under oath, she calmly outlined what she had told me in the bathroom, adding documentation of my parents' financial entanglements with Christopher's failed ventures. "To be clear," Laura asked during her examination, "based on your knowledge and these public records, would you say the plaintiff's claim about family tradition regarding historic properties is accurate?"
No, Aunt Susan replied firmly.
"This is about money, not tradition." Rachel's purchase interfered with their plan to use historic district properties as financial investments to recoup losses from supporting Christopher. When Grayson declined to cross-examine Aunt Susan, it was telling. The financial documents were matters of public record that couldn't be disputed. During the final recess before the judge's ruling, I stepped into the hallway for air and found myself face-to-face with Samantha, Christopher's girlfriend. "Rachel," she said hesitantly, glancing around to ensure Christopher wasn't nearby. "There's something you should know." I sighed, emotionally exhausted. "More family secrets?" She bit her lip. "Christopher has gambling debts. Significant ones. He needed the equity from your house to secure a loan to pay them off. That's the real reason for all this." I stared at her, connecting this final piece of the puzzle. "Does he have a problem?" "He's been getting help, but..." She trailed off, which was answer enough. "I care about him, but I can't support this charade anymore. Using family tradition as cover for his financial problems isn't right." Christopher appeared around the corner then, his expression darkening when he saw us together. "Samantha? What are you doing?" "The truth is coming out one way or another," she told him quietly. "Better from us than in court." His face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You had no right." "She has every right," I interrupted. "Unlike you, she's being honest about what's really happening here." Christopher's careful facade finally crumbled completely. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? Rachel the responsible one. Rachel the successful one. You have no idea what it's like living under that kind of pressure, being the son who's supposed to carry on the family legacy, while you get to do whatever you want." I laughed incredulously. "Whatever I want. I worked my way through college while you had everything paid for. I built my career while you bounced between jobs that Dad's connections handed you. I saved for years to buy my house while you gambled away money our parents couldn't afford to give you. And somehow I'm the one who had it easy." People in the hallway had stopped to watch our confrontation, including several members of our extended family. Christopher noticed the audience and attempted to regain his composure. "You don't understand family obligation," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to my ears. "No, I understand it perfectly," I replied. "Family obligation means honesty, support, and respect, not lies, manipulation, and entitlement. If you needed help, you should have been honest instead of trying to take my home." Our parents had emerged from the courtroom and hurried over, clearly alarmed by the public confrontation. "Christopher, Rachel, this isn't the place," my father hissed, looking around at the spectators. "Actually, it's exactly the place," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've spent weeks spreading lies about me around town, damaging my reputation to support your case. The truth deserves to be just as public." My mother grabbed Christopher's arm. "We're leaving. The judge will make her ruling soon." As they turned to go, I called after them. "Win or lose today, we all know the truth now. Is a house really worth destroying our family over?" My father hesitated, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret, perhaps, or simply calculation of his dwindling options. Then they disappeared around the corner, leaving me standing with Samantha in the crowded hallway. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For what it's worth, I think you deserve that house more than anyone." When court resumed for the judge's ruling, the atmosphere had shifted palpably. News of the hallway confrontation had spread, and even my parents' attorney looked resigned to what was coming. Judge Fleming shuffled her papers, then looked up with an expression of measured disapproval. "Before delivering my ruling, I want to address the broader issues this case has raised. This court is not meant to be a weapon in family disputes, nor a tool to enforce dubious traditions that conveniently appear after a legal transaction has occurred." She directed her gaze specifically at my parents. "The evidence presented shows a troubling pattern of misrepresentation, both to this court and within your family. The so-called family agreement document has been conclusively proven to be created after the property purchase in question, which borders on attempting to defraud the court." My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the financial documentation and testimony regarding the plaintiff's true intentions for the property directly contradict their stated concerns about family heritage. This appears to be an investment dispute disguised as a family tradition case." She straightened her papers decisively. "I am ruling entirely in favor of the defendant, Rachel Warren. She purchased the property legally, with her own funds, through proper channels. The plaintiff's claim is dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Additionally, I am ordering the plaintiffs to pay all court costs and the defendant's legal fees." The gavel came down with finality, and just like that, it was over. The house was mine, legally and unequivocally. The victory felt simultaneously enormous and hollow. I had won, but at what cost to my family relationships? As people began filing out of the courtroom, I saw my parents huddled with their attorney, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, while my father's face was set in grim lines. Christopher stood slightly apart from them, his expression unreadable. I turned to Laura. "Thank you for everything." She smiled warmly. "You stood your ground admirably. Not everyone has the courage to face their family in court, even when they're clearly in the right." Diane hurried over to hug me. "It's over. You won." But as I watched my family leave the courtroom without even a glance in my direction, I wondered what exactly I had won, and what had been irrevocably lost in the process. The weeks following the court verdict passed in a strange limbo. I threw myself into making the house truly mine, painting rooms, carefully selecting furniture that complemented the historical features, planting a garden that would bloom in the coming spring. Each act of ownership felt like both a victory and a reminder of what the house had cost me beyond its mortgage. My parents made no attempt to contact me after the court case. Christopher returned to New York the following day, according to town gossip. I heard through mutual acquaintances that my parents had become increasingly isolated, declining social invitations and withdrawing from community organizations they'd been active in for years. Part of me felt guilty for the public exposure of our family dysfunction, while another part remained angry that they had forced the situation to such extremes. Mostly, though, I felt a profound sadness for what could have been, the supportive family I'd always longed for but never truly had. 1 month after the verdict, on a cool autumn evening as I sat on my front porch with a glass of wine, enjoying the crimson sunset over the trees that lined Oak Street, a car pulled up in front of my house. My father emerged alone, looking older and more hesitant than I'd ever seen him. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps, hands in his pockets. "May I come up?" I nodded silently, setting my wine glass on the small table beside my chair. He climbed the steps slowly and took the seat across from me, declining my automatic offer of a drink. For several minutes, we sat in silence, watching the sunset deepen from orange to purple. Finally, he spoke. "The house looks good. You've done some work on it." "Thank you," I replied cautiously. "The porch railing needed reinforcing, and I've painted most of the interior." Another silence stretched between us, laden with decades of unspoken feelings. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, the words clearly difficult for him. "What we did, taking you to court, the things we said about you around town, it was wrong." I waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. "Your mother isn't ready to admit it yet, but I've made mistakes. With Christopher, with how we treated you." I told myself I was being a good father by helping him, by giving him every advantage. But I was actually enabling behavior that hurt him in the long run. He looked down at his hands. After the court case, Christopher admitted the extent of his gambling. "It's worse than we knew. Much worse. He's entering a treatment program in New York." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. Despite everything, I didn't want my brother to suffer. "The financial revelations in court were accurate," he continued. "We remortgaged our home multiple times to cover Christopher's debts and failed ventures. We're nearly bankrupt, Rachel. The historic district properties were supposed to be our financial salvation. Your house." He gestured at the structure behind us. "It was meant to be the cornerstone of rebuilding our retirement." The honesty was surprising and long overdue. "Why didn't you just tell me? If you needed help, why create this elaborate lie about family tradition?" He sighed heavily.
Bride. Shame.
"And yes, the favoritism you experienced was real. We did prioritize Christopher, and by the time we realized the damage we were doing to both of you, the pattern seemed too established to break." "It's never too late to change," I said quietly. He nodded, looking out at the darkening street. "Your mother and I are selling our house. We need to downsize dramatically to have any hope of a secure retirement. Christopher's treatment program is expensive, but necessary." I felt a complicated mix of emotions: sympathy for their financial struggles, frustration at the choices that had led them there, and lingering hurt from years of being second best. "I'm not asking for your help," he added quickly. "You've worked hard for what you have, and we have no right to expect anything from you after how we've treated you. I just wanted you to know the truth, and to say I'm sorry. Truly sorry." As he rose to leave, I found myself speaking without having planned to. I could help with some financial counseling, creating a realistic budget, debt management strategies. It's part of what I do professionally. He paused, surprise evident on his face. "You do that? After everything?" "I'm not offering money," I clarified. "But professional advice, yes. You're still my family, despite everything." Something shifted in his expression, respect, perhaps, that had been missing for too long. "I'd appreciate that. And maybe, in time, your mother." "One step at a time," I said, unwilling to promise instant reconciliation. "Let's start with honest communication and see where it leads." He nodded, understanding the boundaries I was establishing. As he walked back to his car, his shoulders seemed less burdened than when he'd arrived. 6 months later, my house had truly become my home. I'd filled it with books, artwork, and furniture that reflected my personality. The garden was beginning to flourish with the first blooms of spring. More importantly, I'd filled it with people, friends who gathered for dinner parties, colleagues who came for professional networking events, neighbors who stopped by with housewarming gifts months after I'd moved in. Christopher had completed his initial treatment program and, surprisingly, had not returned to the finance world. He'd taken a modest job at a community center in New York working with youth, a complete departure from his previous career path. We exchanged occasional texts, not close, but civil, a tentative rebuilding of sibling connection. My parents had moved to a small ranch house on the outskirts of Mapleton. Following my financial guidance, They had created a structured repayment plan for their debts and were slowly stabilizing their situation. My mother had finally reached out, first through my father, then with a careful lunch invitation that I'd accepted with equal caution. Our relationship remained fragile, years of hurt not easily erased, but we were talking again. Aunt Susan had become a more regular presence in my life, the aunt-niece relationship blossoming into a friendship between equals. "You remind me so much of myself at your age," she told me once. "But you're braver than I was. You stood your ground." On a perfect June evening, exactly 1 year after I'd received the keys to my house, I hosted a proper housewarming party, the celebration I should have had from the beginning. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, even a few family members, including Aunt Susan, filled the rooms with conversation and laughter. As I stood on my porch watching the sunset, much as I had the night my father came to apologize, Diane joined me with fresh glasses of champagne. "Quite a difference from your first attempt at a housewarming," she observed, handing me a glass. "Night and day," I agreed. Though I wouldn't change what happened. As painful as it was, it forced generations of family patterns into the open where they could finally be addressed. "To standing your ground," Diane toasted, clinking her glass against mine. Later that evening, after most guests had departed, I found myself in the library, my favorite room in the house. Running my fingers along the spines of my growing book collection, I reflected on the journey of the past year. My mailbox had filled with letters after the court case made local headlines, not just from Mapleton residents, but from people in surrounding communities who had experienced similar family dynamics. Many described the golden child/scapegoat pattern I knew so well, the painful recognition that a parent's love seemed conditional on being the right kind of child. Inspired by these shared experiences, I'd started a monthly support group that met in my home's spacious dining room. Siblings Healing from Family Favoritism, we called ourselves. The simple act of sharing stories, of having our experiences validated by others who truly understood, proved powerfully healing for all involved. My house, which had been the catalyst for so much family conflict, had transformed into a place of healing and connection. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very property my parents had tried to take from me had become a sanctuary where others could process similar family wounds. As I prepared for bed that night, I paused at my bedroom window, looking out at the quiet street below. The historic homes, with their graceful architecture and deep roots in Mapleton soil, would outlast all of us and our human dramas. I had fought for my right to be part of this neighborhood story, and in doing so had finally claimed my own story as well. The next morning, I sat on my porch with coffee, watching the early light illuminate the dewy grass of my front lawn. A car slowed as it passed, then pulled over. My mother emerged, hesitating before approaching the steps. "I was driving by and saw you sitting out here," she explained. "I hope it's not too early for a visit." I gestured to the chair beside me. "Coffee?" She nodded, and I went inside to pour her a cup. When I returned, she was looking around at the porch with new eyes. "You've made it beautiful," she said softly. "The house suits you." "Thank you," I replied, handing her the coffee. "That means a lot." We sat in companionable silence, watching the neighborhood awaken. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. It wasn't the perfect mother-daughter relationship I'd longed for as a child. But it was a beginning, honest, cautious, and real. Like the house that had brought both conflict and resolution, it was imperfect but solid, with room to grow. Thank you all for following this difficult chapter of my life. Family dynamics can leave lasting wounds, but they don't have to define our futures. If my story of standing up for myself has resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to set firm boundaries with family? How did it change your relationships? The support from this community has been incredible through my journey of healing and finding justice within my family. Share this video if you know someone who might need to hear that it's okay to stand your ground, even against those who should love you unconditionally. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is as important as the family we're born into. Until next time, this is Rachel Warren, standing strong in the home I fought for and earned.